Hello all, good afternoon. I welcome you all for the special panel discussion on land movement in India and Brazil, a comparative view. And for this, we are happy to invite our speakers, Dr. Vasundhara Jairath and PhD exchange scholar from JNU, Rafael Soriano. I would like Dr. Saqib to tell about the speaker and take forward the session. Yeah.
Greetings to both the speakers. I'll just take a minute to talk about the topic and then we'll move on to the speakers. Despite differences in geography and cultural backgrounds, we see that India and Brazil, both BRICS nations, have witnessed similarities in their development trajectories over the last few decades. And one of these has been a land issue and the land-related movements in the last few decades, arising mainly from historical inequalities, land concentrations, and struggles for agrarian justice. So, this panel discussion will look at the historical trajectories of both the countries on land and land movements, and also try to give a kind of a comparative view on the issue. So, with this, I welcome both the speakers. Uh, Rafael Soriano, who is a PhD student at UFABC, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and also in exchange PhD scholar at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He's also been associated with a landless workers movement in Brazil. And we also have Dr. Vasundhara Jairath, who is assistant professor in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. So once again, a hearty welcome, and I would request Rafael to go first, followed by Dr. Vasundhara Jairath. We'll have about, say, 20 minutes for each of the speakers, followed by question answers and discussions. So over to you, Rafael.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, and salute my companion. Can you hear me well? Let's talk by here. Well, just giving more information about myself and trajectory as you have introduced this, Saqib. I am doing my PhD in UFABC, the university in São Paulo, and I'm doing this scholarship here in JNU under Pravin Jha also, and here studying the Kisan Sabha. In my previous work, academic work, and the master's and specialization and graduation, I studied and focused on our agrarian question in Brazil, mainly in my state, Alagoas, which is northeast of Brazil. So its characteristic formation, and I used to watch also from the speech of the peasants themselves. In this perspective, understanding the agrarian question of Brazil as an agrarian question of liberation of an agrarian. It is now, as I qualified, as I analyzed, a peasants' people power that the movement, the social movement, build against the development of capitalism in the countryside and in the agriculture in Brazil. So I'm master in social sciences for University of Campina Grande in Paraíba, and also I'm graduated as journalist. I'm journalist, and as a journalist, also as a people's grassroots educator and cultural producer, I do my work along with the MST, Landless Movement in Brazil, for the last 16 years, let's say, in my life, also in the struggle, and the struggle became also my subject in the academic trajectory, doing this practice philosophy of us. So, introducing the position of our view here, we are in an I'm not concerned about the time. Okay, if you can please, Avinash, just remind me with 10 minutes.
Yeah.
10
Yeah,
minutes
we have,
and then 15.
we have 20 minutes. We have 20 minutes each.
Yeah, just to advise me in the middle and near the.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. We do our analysis from this perspective of the agrarian question and dialectic materialism perspective of mainly understanding the use, the possession, and the property of the land, analyzing also the classes within the social formation in Brazil, observing the countryside. And here I can start let's doing a overview of our social formation, understanding how the land is configured, is set during the historical time of the invasion of Brazil. We have this same background of colonization marks. Also, after that, we can do some characterizing the peasants. How was the formation of peasants? Well, and then getting to that point where how I mentioned the peasants' people's power, how it was along the story, along the history, how it was consolidated. These types of resistance and fights in the land context, and then I come to the recent struggles and the format of the struggles that mainly MST as the largest and most massive movement, how it does this struggle, well, bringing also some numbers and some emblematic case that we have recently. Talking about our social formation, we always used to say that the colonization, it occurs directly and it affects directly the land. There is no colonization if there is no land possession, no land kidnapping. So this is the biggest mark of our social formation and land distribution or land characteristics now in Brazil. It comes yet from this historical perspective. Well, I don't know how we are in the audience, in Indian or Brazilians. I see some Brazilian people around also, but just to bring the facts of Brazilian historical facts, we were invaded in 1500, in 16th century, yes. So we had this 400 years of colonization under Portugal regime. And the first characteristic that it implements with the land is total possession by the crown, the Portuguese crown, and all these years. And there is this big phase, let's say, between the invasion and in beginning of colonization until when they are already after the independence of Brazil, which happened in 1822. So we had the first land law, the first legislative mark about the land, law of the land. It was called like this, made by the Imperium of Brazil at that time. So it marks a second phase of our land configuration. Well, before that, in this large first phase, we had the characteristics of possession. The property of the land was of the crown, and it was concessed for some people, chosen people by the Portuguese, and in heritage. It was a heritage possession. The heritage captainage, something like that, historical called, and some families that received this land, and over generations it was passed by. And the use of the land, it is very important to mark here the reference of that debate that we always face in South and colonized countries of how was the formation and the conditions of if it was capitalist, not capitalist relations, and that the good remark that Jacob Gorende brings us to light, that is the colonial slavery. It means, of course, it has many characteristics of pre-capitalist relations in work, in the use of and the production that it was made there, mainly sugarcane production. But all this work, all this value that was being formed was related to the beginning, the initial phase of capitalism, the mercantilism, and it was crucial for the formation of capitalism itself. So it's already capitalism with this specific characteristic that called colonial slavery by Jacob Gorende. It's a masterpiece of our studies about land and capitalist or pre-capitalist relations in Brazil. So putting this mark of the colonial slavery by Jacob Gorende, and we understand that this production of sugarcane based on the kidnapped forced labor of African people that came to Brazil as enslaved people, it was generating value for the formation of a global system or the capitalist that was in phase of formation. There is this integration, but with very tough relations on the grassroots. Well, it was a enslavement regime. Millions of people were brought from Africa to many places in Brazil, and this also integrated this agriculture. Actually, the integration of the economy of the new nation was conditioned by the colonizing action that brings transfer the value of the enslaved labor under the kidnapped land to the metropolis, to the European recent formated capital. Then we have this other fact, a historical fact, that is the law of lands that transform a bit, transform a lot the relations. It was near actually the liberation of enslavement, which occurred in 1888. The law of land, the land law, came in 1850. It remarked, so the land at the first time became mercancy. It was possible to have commercial relations over the land. It had marked, of course, very high price for that. So it kept going as an elite element of economic and political element. And also remarked, because it was before the slavery liberation, that Black people couldn't possess land. So it is already preparing the scenario for the slavery liberation in 1888, which is an important remark because these people, they came out from, it was called Senzala, places where the Black people in enslavement used to live, from nowhere, from Senzala to nowhere, because there was no land, there was no public policy to welcome these the recent liberated people, freed people, and it gives us a hint of the formation of the mass of landless people that in the future it would also occur. So the configuration of land, it came from this hereditary initial Some of the names of these families, they are still the same after 400 years, after more than 500 years now, owning the land. It marks a lot our land distribution. And during this phenomenon of this transition from this regime of plantation that I called first, which was the large land owned by very few people, using the slavered labor, producing for the exportation. So this after this, let's say the transition from this regime to when the capitalist ideas were starting to arrive to Brazil in this end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century. We had this configuration of this legal configuration of the new law of land, yes, the law for the lands, and giving a summary of the land configuration from the years, the historical years. After that, we had some movements of, we say, more conservative modernization, but increase in the industry, mainly related to the end of Great Wars, the Second World War, when the industry of pesticides, of tractors, they were spread globally. They didn't have more tanks to work their factory. They had to do tractors. They didn't have any more chemical weapons. They had to do chemical for the agriculture to kill our peasant population. So it was, let's say, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, strong implementation of this pact of modernization, but conservative, marked also by the entrance of the banks and the World Bank in this agricultural economy and in this land economy also. And these markets the second part of the last century, and we come at the end of the last century for the FMI. Oh my God, how is FMI? The Monetary Fund, International IMF in English. I forgot the IMF hegemony and the IMF ideas of neoliberalism under agriculture also, and under the agrarian context. Since the 90s, it marks what we call the phenomenon of agrobusiness. It brings the element of the stocks, of the land being used to produce a commodity that are in the stock market around, in the main stock markets. For you understand, my state in Brazil, which is Alagoas, the second smallest state in Brazil, still produce the largest agricultural produce is sugarcane. To understand the permanence of these marks of colonization, still produce sugarcane and this sugarcane produce a sugar that is commercialized, is negotiated in the New York stock market. So this presence of that production in the global markets as a commodity, as also how can we say, set all the configurations of that production by this financial regime and in this fictitious capitalism that we live. So this is let's say, the last phase that we are more recent and more in our days. We had, if we're going to characterize the degradations and actually historical degradation and the conditions of this movement of capitalism in the agriculture in Brazil, we would importantly remark the large amount of poisoning, of pesticides that we keep poisoning our land, our soil, our rivers, the air, and the populations. So this is an important mark. Also, as we can pick like emblematic examples, the case of suicide, peasants with debt with big banks. So all these politics that were implemented since the third agricultural revolution and the neoliberal era, it gives us this condition of uh, well, death, poisoning, also this under the conditions of the stock market, marking the decisions of cultivating here or not, future sales of the crops that even not exist yet. So this is the, let's say, the characterization of our condition. There is one important remark, maybe I forgot at the moment, historical moment, to say that there was this, why there was no agrarian reform in this evolution of the land possession in Brazil. Excuse me. Why not an agrarian reform? There is one element very important that, well, everybody knows here also the same. Land is not only not only the economical factor, not only the economical index it's related, not only the the extraordinary rank. Not only this, it's also power. Land is power. It's local condition in local conditions in local regimes, and there was a kind of non speakable agreement with this in recent developed class of the bourgeoisie, creating bourgeoisie in Brazil and the end of the 19th century and beginning of 20th century. This agreement, the tacit agreement with them and the landlords. It was like, okay, you will rule the economy now, but don't mess with my land. Don't change this. We keep this regime like that. So there was the capitalist formation in Brazil didn't needed agrarian reform to develop all the developments that agrarian reforms did in other capitalist formations. So there is this agreement and this permanence of the big land, the large lands, how we call it latifundio, the large amount of lands in hands of small groups. Of course, during these last century, some more divisions, but not democratic divisions. The land was divided among them, let's say. Well, have this characterized, we can talk a bit about the formation of the peasant in our reality. We have, let's say, three main perspectives of the formation of this peasantry in Brazil. We had that miscegenous mix that was happening in Brazil from the root of Africa, with the root of the white people that invaded, with the root of the indigenous people that were already there. All this mix formated people that yes, they had a land in the limits of the colonization. They not in the central areas, but there is these Brazilians, let's say the Brazilian people that that was information by this mix of the different peoples. Also, we have the people from the Quilombos. I don't know if you know what is Quilombo. It was a territory of resistance during the period of the enslavement in Brazil. So those who dared to escape, they organized real societies. We have the example of Quilombo dos Palmares, which is also in Alagoas, my state. It was like a sub governance, a parallel governance during times of colonization. So it was a free territory. mixed with indigenous black people that escaped from slavery, and also white people one another around, free regimes, militarized. The Quilombos were land communities uh, 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 fighting for freedom, and the most expressive context that we have. So these Quilombo people is also one part of the formation of our peasantry. And there is the phenomenon in the last century of European immigration. Uh, it was like pushed by the Brazilian government that mainly went to the countryside and also part of our peasantry formation. These came mainly from Italy, Japan, German, Lebanon. There was a racist thought at the time that, okay, now that we are not dealing with slave labor anymore, we are formating a labor class, the working class in Brazil. It's not that those blacks that we will put. Let's bring some white people from Europe to create a so this kind of eugenic and eugenist and the racist thought was also in the background of these immigration movements pushed by the government, and also it's part of our formation of the peasantry in Brazil. There is this lack that I mentioned before, because the lack of people that was in enslavement, not the one who escaped and formed the kilometers, but who those were in senzalas, and like in 1888 they got to freedom, they came out from senzala, but there's a lack of policies to welcome them in society, and it's already we see them as this formation of peasantry, but with no land. So coming the landless as a concept also in Brazil, a very important one. We observe along all this history, all the time, during invasion, during the operation, that these people suffered from this, well, the colonizers, then the capitalist ones in the countryside. All the time, the oppression was accompanied, that was related to resistance processes. We observed this all over history in Brazil since the invasion. So we got the indigenous as the main example of resistance, main of the peoples that we had more than 800 peoples, ethnies in Brazil at time, more than 5 million in the moment of invasion, and they were the first to resist, and all the resistance also are related to land, to the territory. So there is this trajectory, this timeline that if we look to a timeline of resistance in Brazil from the indigenous people, then we have the Quilombos, the black freedom enslavement for resistance. All of them are related to the land. So the oppression, the colonization, it occurs over the land. The resistance also comes mainly and fundamentally linked to the land. So we have also all these episodes and main episodes of resistance. Important, I said about the Quilombo dos Palmares, which is in northeast Brazil, Alagoas. It stayed alive for more than 100 years. The colonizers trying military to defeat them, and they resistance a long time. And all these marks of resistance, all these spots of resistance, they marked the feeling that we have for the liberation of land, even in the last century. We see an important mark, also a historical mark, in the 30s of last century, 20s and 30s of last century, with the action and grassroots action of the Communist Party of Brazil, they decided to do an important grassroots operation, politically educating people in the countryside of Brazil, and this resulted in a newborn movement that it was called the Peasantry Leagues. The Peasant Leagues was our historical but most recent example and part of resistance and proposing, bringing the discussion of agrarian reform to Brazil to the mainstream. They got a lot of struggle, and they also used to say that their reference of struggle of resistance over the land, it came in reference of the quilombos. It came in reference of the indigenous resistance also. So this connection, this link, that all the struggles over the land, they are connected and they inspire one another and bring the people, even for the other futures and other generations, to fight for the land, use, and also for an agrarian perspective, agrarian policies. It's this link that connects all these struggles that I used to call the peasants' people's power. So there is from the indigenous to the quilombos to the peasants' league, because we are academic but also connected with this struggle.
Yeah.
We put there. Okay.
Yeah, Rafael, we have another 5 minutes.
Got it.
Yeah.
We put the agenda of the agrarian reform as a political policy to be fought, to be conquered, issued in Brazil. At a peak that in the 50s, in the 60s, it was very commented among society, common society, the agrarian reform importance and that thing. So all these brought the agrarian reform as a mark, as a policy, to the perspective. But then, as you may remember, Brazil had this period of civil military dictatorship. There was a coup, and the military of Brazil, so of course, coordinated with imperialist powers, took the power in '64, and we had this darkness era of all the struggles, all the projects, projects were suppressed, and I'll try to give some tips here because I had a lot yet to comment. But it was exactly in the end of this period, Brazil was experiencing the time of reborning of masses movement, marches for liberation, for amnesty of the period of dictatorship. At this exact moment, also in the countryside, there was a moment of relieving the grassroots actions, and with the important action from the church, there is this land commission inside the Catholic Church. They were very important at the moment of, when every political reunion is prohibited in a dictatorial regime, the churches, the mosques, they keep being the place where people can reunite, discuss some ideas. And there was this important commission that is the seed for the formation of the movement that would come in '81, the landless movement. The landless movement beginning in these years, it was a synthesis of many regional movements that were appearing with the statics of the land occupation, and it was reunited in one national movement, which is the MST, Movimento dos Trabalhadores Rurais Sem Terra, or Landless Rural Workers Movement, MST Brazil. It is until now the largest one. There were some divisions along time. There are like more than 50 agrarian and more popular movements, the social movements in Brazil. But MST is the largest, the hegemonic, and the most emblematic to represent the trajectory of this struggle. I bring here at the end a look at the format of the struggle. There is this important tactics that are being since the beginning of the 80s, in the 80s and the 90s, which is the land occupation. It is the main tactic of MST. It is a mark, the camps that MST does in the large, because we have an important element in Brazil from our constitution after the dictatorship, which is the social function of land. And the social function of land gives some parameters, some patterns that land must follow. Otherwise, it must be uh, disappropriated by the government through the agrarian reform. It's marked on the Constitution of Brazil. So it is a opportunity, and the movement uses this opportunity with the land occupation, identifying these non-productive lands or lands that have labor-mental analog labor relations, or lands that have environmental crimes. The movement organized this phenomenon of land occupation, which is a success until now. It is the main tactics of MST, but also we bring an important element of the march. The MST is known by big march from long distance also, but also locally. And the march brings us this reference that the occupation is on the countryside, but negotiation, the march is on the city, is in the city, where this movement dialogues with the government, and these confrontations of political projects also. So there is this political integration of countryside and city, urban countryside integration from in the political perspective. Well, these are the main tactics of the format of the struggles that MST has in Brazil. But since the beginning, many evolutions and readaptations of the format of the struggle, how to struggle, right? Since the beginnings, the schools, the education is one of the most important tactics that MST has in its strategy of the agrarian reform. All the camps, new camps, they formed in the next week a new itinerary school, which is also a mark. But also more recently, in the year 2000 year, in the last decades also, we mark that MST just did 40 years this last year, and the movement has updated also its tactics, coming to communication tactics over social media, over all the elements of this symbolic challenge, this symbolic power challenge that we have with the movement have with the other side, let's say. And there is an important mark of the tactics of how MST struggles, which is the land itself, the action on the infrastructure. Because after the land is divided by the government in agrarian reform processes, conquered by the resistance with marches, with occupations, these people will give this land other conditions of sharing, other conditions of labor applying, and the work in agriculture generating value, generating even more than value, generating food, which is the main statements for now. I brought some numbers of conquers along the history. I think I'll just give you like the historical numbers of settlements, that we call it settlement, when the government gets the land and divides for the landless people. So it was more with Lula government, before it in the other government. that we had a peak of struggle, we had a good amount, but after that, in Dilma government, it went all down. Then came the coup, Bolsonaro, after almost nothing, and now we are regaining some space in the numbers of creating settlements. I will summary everything now, okay? I know that I'm getting the time. MST brings a specific agrarian program. There is this People's Agrarian Reform. It was discussed in last Congress in 2014, and it is the theoretical practice basis of the movement, and this political program for the countryside of Brazil. The popular agrarian reform brings this confrontation of, instead of producing commodities for capital, producing food to feed people, that our populations that are starving actually. So doing this confrontation and also bringing this updating this political link with the urban community, with the countryside city relations. So the People's Agrarian Reform, the movement produces out, it's very important with as a tactic of struggle, the fairs that are organized like big events in Brazil, doing this also this bringing this leftist culture, popular culture to celebrate this meeting of country and city with the element of food produced by workers without this the seller between them, direct sales from the countryside to the city customers. It is in the fair, it happens as a symbol of unity. Finalizing, we have the last political context in Brazil, backgrounds in Brazil. I cannot go further in that, but you know that we had a coup, then we had a far-right government with Bolsonaro, and the movements, social movements, and the specific, let's say, the union agendas of each movement, they were all kind of suppressed to a common political background struggle. All of us were fighting against all the movements were fighting against the far right and the conditions that were all the policies destroyed. So there is this entrance of MST as a social force in the political process also. We can remember the fight, this big struggle for free Lula, when Lula was in jail. So MST was not, at that moment, we were not occupying land. We were much more, the MST was much more fighting for the political aspect of our society at the moment. So these campaigns, everything brought Lula out, and then the movement decided, it was also not a time to discuss agrarian reform, we need land. No, we need to elect, Brazilian people was needing to elect Lula. So MST has this link with the general political context in these last years, going very strongly into this elections campaign. And now we are in let's say a victory moment that Lula got the election. MST has some representations inside the government, even. And I bring the last thing, okay, I promise now, an emblematic case, a big case that we had these days, with this context of no political background that enables some advance, some victories in agrarian reform, in the land struggles. We had this land that was just disappropriated by the government. They took the land, Lula government. It's a very remarkable camp of MST in Minas Gerais. They were displaced like 5 times already with much violence. Many international campaigns happened. Maybe some of you have even heard about in 2018, 2020, 21, with the evictions menace in Campo do Meio, Quilombo, Campo Grande. It's a old farm related to an industry. It was occupied still in the 90s. And after all of this long struggle with eviction, with the resistance, with the production of the, I even have some here, the coffee that is exported internationally. All this resistance synthesized a great victory of that community, of that people under MST flag. They got the land. The land is now a settlement. It was just announced by government with big ceremony in the land. The president, he went to the land to declare it was now a settlement. It is a very emblematic case that we bring to represent this overall view that we could have in these people's peasant power that MST and the land movement in general does against the capital and the agribusiness in Brazil. I'm sorry if I delayed too much, spoke too much, but I hope that you had got the points. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael, for that historical overview of land movement in Brazil. Now over to Dr. Vasundhara Jairath, please.
Hi, thanks, Akib. Thanks for organizing this. It's such a great idea to have this kind of a session. But I do have to apologize. Thank you, Rafael, for that very long and extensive, detailed, and historical presentation. I have to apologize in advance because my presentation is very, very brief. I've been a little a little unwell, so I won't speak very long. I also haven't sort of gone into the historical elements of the land question and land movements because there's again so much, and I imagine many people might already be familiar with it within this research committee or people who are attending. But what I thought I would do more is to actually look at some of the questions in the contemporary context and maybe just flag um, uh, some elements to think more deeply about, and then possibly in the discussion, if there's anything in particular, then one can go into a bit more detail about it. What I also thought I'd do very briefly as I was listening to Rafael was to maybe, as I'm speaking, point out to some of the key differences also between Brazil and India. So I'll do that. I hope I don't take too much time, and that way we have a little bit of time for discussion. Sorry. So I just wanted to begin, by we have the usual statistics that we always begin on questions of agrarian or land questions in India, which is that the large proportion, more than 85% of cultivating households fall under small and marginal farmers, which means that they own less than 5 acres of land. And this is something that has gone on increasing. The proportion of small and marginal farmers amongst the total cultivating households has gone on increasing. And what it indicates principally is that the average size of land holding has gone on decreasing in the post-independence period. Right. The first point of difference, as I was listening to Rafael, was of course the fact when he says, the land question, really movements, resistance, all of that begins, and of course, as well as private property, it begins in the colonial period. And while, that is true in the case of, to some extent, in the case of India, in that the colonial period, we see very significant transformations in land and land relations in the colonial period, but we don't have the kind of context in Brazil, which is a settler colonial state, right? What we have, in fact, in the Indian context is the colonial state playing a very important role, but also reinforcing the existing social structures, hierarchies, land ownership patterns, reinforcing certain structures of power that existed, to transform them, but also to sharpen or to tighten control of certain communities over land, but in complex ways, right? So while colonial rule is extremely important in the Indian story as well, of course, and the introduction of this idea of private property that transforms land relations so significantly across the country, but we see not the colonial state coming in and taking away all of the land, but in fact is sort of coming into an already existing complex set of already unequal land systems, already non-democratic forms of land holdings within village, rural India, etc. And bringing about significant changes within that. Right. But post-independence, what we do see, despite the immediate rhetoric of land reforms, land sealing, abolition of Zamindari Act, all of these acts, which threw a certain pressure of precisely peasant politics, movements around land rights, struggles of sharecroppers, tenants, etc. Precisely because there was so much unrest just around the cusp of independence, that these questions were important political questions for the newly independent Indian state. And even if it was on paper, it meant that we had a string of progressive legislation that were meant to break with the kind of land monopoly that existed in the Indian context. Again, a familiar story that land reforms haven't been successfully implemented, if at all, in certain parts, certain states. The states that always come up are West Bengal and Kerala. There's a critique of those two states as well for not having gone to the absolute bottom layer and having left out precisely Dalit landless agricultural workers from that. But even in other parts, we see at certain points through tenancy rights, through tenancy acts and legislations, that a certain middle rung of the peasantry, tenant peasantry sharecroppers, who do get access to a certain amount of land, but it doesn't fundamentally alter in any significant way the structure and social structure and hierarchies that center around land, that are also very significantly linked to caste in India. And that's the second point of difference from the Brazilian context, where caste and community matters so much to the way in which land is organized, right? And yeah, okay. So what we have post independence is, in fact, despite all of this, what we have is, in fact, a reducing average size of land holding. I'm just drawing some numbers from an essay by Amit Basol and Dipankar Basu from 2011, where they point out that in 1962, the average landholding of small farmers, which is those who own between 2.5 and 5 acres of land, was about 6.02 acres, whereas in 2003, the average landholding amongst the same section was 3.44 acres. Right? Similarly, amongst middle farmers who own between 5 to 10 acres of land in 1962, the average holding within that section was 7.11 acres. In 2003, this goes down to 6.65 acres. And large landholding, which is more than 10 acres, the average landholding used to be in 1962 about 22.21 acres. And in 2003, it comes down to 18.12 acres. Right? So, of course, proportionally, the reduction is largest in the small farmers, the average size of holding. Very, very important, extremely central difference with Brazil in the Indian context is precisely these numbers, right? Which is the average size of holding. For example, presently the average land holding size nationally, globally, across all holding sizes, etc., is 1.08. 1.08 hectares, right? Whereas in Brazil, and I just did this very quickly, so this is the AI overview. So in case there's any mistake, Rafael or the others, you can correct me. But the AI overview said the average size of agricultural landholding in Brazil is 69 hectares. This is a very important difference in terms of the amount of land and the people. And it says then, however, this figure can vary significantly depending on the region, with the central west region having an average of 322 hectares, which is almost 5 times the national average. In contrast, it says 81% of agricultural establishments in Brazil have up to 50 hectares of land, right? Which is also for them, that's below average. But they occupy, so 81% who have at least up to 50 hectares of land occupy only 12.8% of the total agricultural area. So we do, of course, see, this should not indicate that everyone has a lot of land, that the extent of land concentration is, of course, very high. But very significantly, and I'll come, to why this is so important in the Indian context, which is that we don't have land, right? What this means is that the average size of land holding is so small that the economic viability of these land holdings, well, they're not economically viable, right? Increasingly, given that the size of land holdings are continuously decreasing. The only section within whose landholding sizes actually increase are the marginal peasants, which are the lowest category, which is those who own below 2.5 acres of land, which has increased from 1962 from 1.22 hectares to 1.22 acres to 1.61 acres in 2003. So what we're actually seeing then in the Indian context is more and more people who have smaller and smaller pieces of land, right? In that sense, the broader trend that we see is not moving towards, a greater concentration of land, is not moving, towards the small and marginal farmers getting squeezed out of land, but in fact, more and more people becoming small and marginal farmers with these very small, uneconomical land holdings. Now, again, this is not in any way to say that, because we're saying we're not moving towards any kind of significant land concentration, this is not in any way to say that we're seeing a democratization of the rural spaces through a democratization of land relations or ownership structures. Um, the reason that we see this, there are multiple factors, and Basole and Basu, for example, point out that to a small degree, like I mentioned earlier, land reforms have contributed, especially from the upper to the middle peasantry, have contributed to some amount of shift from of land. However, the pace at which the population amongst these sections, the number of people that are being added to the small, marginal, and middle peasantry, is so much more that transfer hasn't really done anything in terms of significantly increasing the amount of land that people have to be able to prosper and flourish. Right? So you have that on the one hand, some degree of transfer of land from an upper layer to a middle layer. You have, increasingly with the commodification of land, transfer of land through sale, and fragmentation of land, even because of sale. Sometimes people have to sell a little piece of land because of a marriage, a death, an illness in the family, education. These are some of the critical medical emergencies, and education are two of the most important factors for people having to sell off pieces of their land. And of course, the third is the demographic pressure, right? Fragmentation also that happens through inheritance, where one piece of land gets split between the people who will, the next generation, but also simply we have a lot more people now, but the land remains, despite some amount of extension, but eventually at some point the land is limited. So we're left with then, a structure of land holding that is filled up with very small holders of uneconomical land holding sizes, yet in no way, a more democratized system through, redistribution to more number of people. Even while, keep in mind, the average landholding size is only 1 hectare, right? Which means if you just take the entire land and all of the households that cultivate, the average comes only to about 1 hectare. And this is what I wanted to come to, again, in contrast to the Brazil situation, which is that, on the one hand, land reforms as a political agenda, we talk about how it's, on part of the state at a certain point, post the Green Revolution, and then, of course, with neoliberal reforms, the state has pretty much abandoned the agenda of land reforms. It's off. It's no longer an election agenda, the question of land, redistribution of land, etc. But when we look at these figures, it also points out to the fact that land reforms are increasingly simply land reforms, right? The redistribution of land in our current context is becoming politically not so much of a relevant concept in the way that it was in the post-independence period, precisely because it doesn't seem that a redistribution of land across this population is necessarily likely to lead to this being a viable option for substantive upward social mobility, right? In a context where we are the average land holding size is 1 hectare, 1.08 hectare. So we also see, and another point of difference that again Rafael was mentioning was the phrase that he, and of course that comes from the MST, is an agrarian reform. Whereas in India, we haven't really had the emergence of this in any kind of significant substantive way or conception of a broader agrarian reform, which also brings in the land question, but also looks more broadly at the political economy of agriculture, at how things are produced, who has control over these questions, whether it's prices, whether the entire political economy of agriculture. What we have had as a political question in the past, in the post-independence period, has been this question of land redistribution, land rights, democratization of land relations, all of this through land reforms. And we see today in the current context that isn't likely to heed necessarily, that isn't likely to lead in any significant way to um, an emancipatory sort of context. This is also at the same time not to say in any way that land is not, that ownership of land or land rights is an irrelevant question, but simply that in its classical form, land reforms, the redistributive agenda by itself, simply isn't relevant in the way that it was in the post-independence period for cultivating classes, working people as well, right? Not just on part of the state from above. Okay. And so what we saw, what we saw post the movements led by the left around the thing that I was mentioning, tenancy rights, sharecroppers, land rights, land redistribution, land reforms, etc. That was the period of the 60s and 70s where we saw many radical militant movements around land, peasant movements, peasant struggles. By the 80s, we had the new farmers movement who move away from the land question. Right? This was the rich farmers lobby. They were post Green Revolution beneficiaries of the Green Revolution, beneficiaries to some extent of this shift from the uppermost landowning section to the middle section. Right? They were the ones who gained access to land, ownership rights, etc. So for them, land was not such a central question, and the political question shifted to prices, markets, when we're seeing a resurgence of some, or not a resurgence, a continuation of some of those some of those politics into the current farmers movement that's been going on in India. But I won't go into that since the focus is on questions of land. Right? So on the question of land, what we see is by the 90s and certainly by the early 2000s, especially in the post-liberalization period, is a quickening of the pace of land acquisition for so-called development projects, right? Big development projects that need to acquire land, whether for infrastructure, for mining, for special economic zones, increasingly now for national parks and what we call green grabbing. Right? So the conservation complex, um, uh, transport, right? Airports, ports, highways. And so we see the quickening of the pace of this process post 90s. Right? We see approximately the same amount of I'm forgetting the exact numbers. Maybe I can come back to that. But the kind of land acquisition that takes place post independence till 91, and then if you look at the numbers from 91 to 2006, it's I don't remember if it's equivalent or double, but you can see that shift at post 91, the way in which the pace increases. I can pull out the numbers by the discussion time. And so, centrally what we have in India around land, when we see politics, movements, struggles that are going on, they're going on around this question of land acquisition and dispossession of land, what are known as anti-displacement movements, right? Sorry, movements against development-induced displacement. And that begins to gain ground in the early 2000s. You have the movement against the Tata factory in Singur. You have the movement against the SCZ, proposed SCZ in Nandigram, both in West Bengal, in a communist-led government in a state. And from there on, the resistance sort of starts to increase. Then this is simply to give this caveat that movements against big development projects have been going on. Often it's the movement against Narmada Dam that's cited as the first big movement, but we had a lot of movements in different parts of the country. But there's a way in which, also because of the quickening of the pace, there are people like Michael Levian who point out to the way in which a certain kind of legitimacy, not without critique, but a certain kind of legitimacy that had been built up in the post-independence period to justify land acquisition for certain projects of development begins to break down in the post-91 period, because this very clear relationship between the interests of private corporate capital begin to appear very clearly in a way that has much less that has sometimes nearly no linkages, but definitely lesser linkages to any kind of development work for local communities or to the nation in general. Right? So it became harder to justify these projects as projects for national development, for the public good. And more people started challenging that this is no public good, it's simply corporate greed. Right? And therefore, we also begin to see a lot more movements spring up in different parts because of the breakdown of a certain kind of, to a limit, to a fair extent, a certain kind of consensus and legitimacy that in the previous regime had been built up, not without critique, but it had been built up to some extent. Okay, so I just want to, since I don't want to take too much time, I just want to kind of skip ahead to now flag some broad key issues within this context of politics around anti-displacement, anti-dispossession movements, which is, certain kinds of assumptions also at times. The first question that comes up is, in a context with a large majority are small and marginal farmers who have these very uneconomical, unviable land holdings. Why is it that they're not interested in taking the money and giving the land, right? Precisely if it's an uneconomical holding and it's not leading to, it isn't even enough to sustain a household by itself, right? So I'll just come to, I feel like that might be a more familiar part of the story, which is that the terms of exchange are unfavorable, right? But okay, let me come back to this in just a moment. When we're trying to look at this question of, well, why is it that people should resist this process? Because often compensation amounts are also amounts of money that people may never have seen before, right? Depending on the place, the state, a lot of context, a lot of factors. Sorry. Okay, within this, there are two kinds of things. One is an assumption often that it is, smallholders, especially who come from marginalized and oppressed communities. And there's often a big overlap with that, right? With the landholding sizes and the kind of social categories that people come from. That they are the ones who resist, who protest displacement projects. And it's often the big landlords, the rich farmers, etc., who are who sell out, right? Who sell out, who give up their land, who are willing to, sell their land or have their land acquired and take the compensation, but who protest and resist mostly to negotiate higher and better compensations. Right? So this we see often that this is the assumption, that it's the smallholders who resist and protest and the rich farmers who negotiate for better prices. And along with that is often this idea that all smallholders resist. Right? And so I just wanted to sort of unpack these two very briefly, and I think after that I'll stop, so that then from there on, if there's anything particular that anyone wants to discuss further, we can do that. Now, when we look at this resistance of the smallholders, and it is true often that again, it's a very broad generalization. India is such a complex, diverse country. But it is true that we have seen in some of the stronger militant movements that do protest a project, that are not interested in negotiating for prices, do come from smallholding cultivating households. Right? Now, the context of this is, like I was beginning to mention earlier, is the terms of exchange, right? That there is something despite the economic unviability of the holding, and because it's economically unviable, of course, there's no production for the market. Right? Then it's predominantly subsistence production with some amount, if there is a surplus based on the fact that next year, you're assured that you're going to have, a successful yield the next year. That is when, some amount of surplus is sold. It will happen at times of festivals. It will happen at times of whatever medical emergencies. And it can happen at times when certain kind of cash expenses are needed and required. But what it provides at the end of the day is food, and there's something. And I've also worked predominantly where I've done my field work has almost entirely been in tribal areas, unirrigated areas, subsistence cultivation. So, my examples might draw more from there. But sorry, I just lost my chain of thought. Uh, where they do right. So they produce predominantly for consumption and not for sale. Right? And so, despite having a form of agriculture that is dependent on rainfall, and in that sense can be precarious, right? There isn't any assured irrigation, etc. Yet there's a certain kind of sense of security that knowing that you have food, even if at times that plot of land, depending on the size of the land, may not be able to provide food for the whole year. Yet there is at least a good part of the year for which, or maybe even half the year for which, you are able to, that you have food in the house, right, for your family. In the context of broader increasing and growing precarity within the neoliberal period, this counts for a lot. And so while we're seeing this reducing landholding size, a certain kind of agrarian crisis that comes with the neoliberal period, where you have the removal of subsidies, all the kind of support that the state had massively invested in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, in order for the development of agriculture, whether it's into subsidies for your fertilizers, seeds, extension services, etc. All of that is beginning to withdraw. And so as you have all of that, the cost of cultivation also increases. At the same time, you also have forms of non-market forms of labor, non-wage labor forms, sometimes that also constitute feudal or oppressive forms of labor, right? You had possibilities, for example, of people that you could hire to take care of cattle, where you hardly paid anything, you paid in kind, very, very low payments. All of which is beginning to now disappear with the increasing possibility of wage labor that now exists, across the rural economy. NREGA, of course, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, is one contributing factor to the possibility of wage labor, but also very significantly the boom in the construction industry and the various auxiliaries of the construction industry, whether you have stone crushers, and related things to that. So increasingly now, with the possibility of, or even in the actual construction work, the possibility of wage labor also reduces these other forms of non-market labor, like I said, which could very often be oppressive as well, and based in caste relations, all of which now disappear, and increase the monetary cost of cultivation. Right? Despite all of that, in this growing precarious system, where there aren't enough jobs in the context of jobless growth, the production of food is something that presents a certain food security, presents a certain kind of security and stability that is extremely central and crucial for people. Right? So that's one. Because often, the resistance of smallholders takes on a language of defense, and in tribal and indigenous areas all the more, defense of a certain way of life, defense of uh, a certain, it could be pace of life, a certain way of relating to the land. There are all of these ideas as well. But when we really look at this, the material context and the political economy of agriculture and its relationship with the non-farm rural economy very significantly, what we are met with precisely is this is the importance of food in that economy, and the importance of being able to provide food for your family outside of market processes to some extent, right? Some may be more insulated, some may be less insulated in this context, but to be able to provide food without having to purchase it from the market. Because the market itself is, especially for marginalized communities, especially for small and marginal farmers, they are continuously placed at the margins of the market, and they never have that space to interact, to exchange equally within market spaces, right? And therefore, so it's not necessarily a sort of intrinsic resistance to market, an intrinsic defense of a certain way of life, or even a certain attachment to an agrarian or rural way of life, with the caveat that at times that is also a factor, but let me not get into that. So it isn't necessarily something intrinsic or inherent about protecting a certain way of life, but it also relates to this political economy of smallholder cultivation, and the diverse ways in which they have to subsist, which is, agriculture in combination with a variety of sources that supplement their household income, that allow for their social reproduction. Right? Agriculture alone doesn't allow for it, but agriculture is very significant to that social reproduction process. So that was something that I wanted to say. The second was, big landowners are not always the only ones who are willing to give up their lands. Right? Most places that you go to with anti-displacement movements, you will often see that the movement is the village communities are split, or the region is split between those who are pro-project and anti-project. It's also a strategy of the state and of private corporate capital to pit people against each other. It can be families, it can be neighbors. Right? It can be communities as well. And often I think what is required is a very detailed study of, what is it that, why is it that people are resisting? Why is it that there are certain sections who are not, who are working with the state or the company or what have you? It's difficult to have sort of a blanket sort of statement on why that takes place. Very often it might be very, very context or site specific. It may be region specific. Historically, there may be certain very, sort of specific elements to that story. So these are things that need to be studied very carefully. And the reason why you see, I mean, a broader context for the smallholders who also very often are interested in giving up their lands or having their lands acquired uh, for a good compensation, is precisely because of this broader agrarian and crisis of social reproduction that we see, especially in rural India, within which you have the context, this question of aspirations, that people have aspirations, they have the will to improve. Increasingly, we are seeing the commodification of every aspect of life, right? We spoke of labor. And like I said, this is not to say whether it's good or bad, because it's not to say that, we want to have these earlier feudal forms of oppressive relations. But I, want to simply sort of pointing out that there's a certain kind of commodification happening across, which means that you need money for everything, right? Which means you have to go to the market for a lot more than you had to go to the market for, and needing money, which agriculture doesn't give, means you uh, must look for these diverse sources of income and livelihood within the wage labor economy. Certain kind of petty businesses. You have microcredit in Assam, in a big way. They've really pushed for microcredit as a way for people to start their own little businesses to generate their own livelihood. So it's sort of, it puts the pressure onto the people. You take the loan, you take the credit, and you figure out your own sort of livelihood, right? So you have this, you have the increased need for money. I had some little story snippets from the field that I wanted to say, but I can see that I've also taken a fair bit of time, so I won't go into some of those stories. But this is simply to say that both the will to want to insulate yourself from the market is very much something that has to be rooted within this historical material context of the way in which the market has historically incorporated these communities. Right? It doesn't, in that sense, necessarily come from something that is a priori, that is, that already exists within people, a certain resistance to a market. It's very historical, it's very material. At the same time, those who want to share in the market, or there's also an aspirational element that pushes people to want to participate in this economy, which is why you have not only large, big landowners or rich farmers who are the ones who are willing to give up their land, but also very much smallholders as well. There's certainly there is of course merit to the argument that rich farmers are more interested in lobbying for prices, and that also relates once again to political economy. But the divide isn't as simple as smallholders resist and big landowners negotiate, right? um, Let me just see if there's uh, okay, I mean, I think I can sort of wrap up, around over here, which is simply to point out that the landscape increasingly within the context of an agrarian crisis uh, that also, there's a lot of work right now that's going on that said the agrarian crisis in India is not universal, in that there are, accumulating classes that are doing very well and that are accumulating capital and, are able to do well for themselves and are able to expand their power and their wealth and all of that. But the certain section that where the agrarian crisis does hit, in fact, um, that section now relates in a very complex way to development projects where we are no longer looking at simply resistance as the story, right, in response to these development projects. Because of this broader crisis of social reproduction, you have complex ways in which uh, people now engage, especially small marginal farmers coming from marginalized and oppressed sections of society, who are engaging with these development projects, who are thinking about the land question, who negotiate. But of course, I mean, while it might be blindingly obvious, I feel like it's very important to emphasize and say this, that the negotiation is highly unequal. Right? They're not two equal partners coming to the table and saying, well, now let's talk about it. These are communities who don't have economic, social, political, cultural capital very often, who are negotiating with very, very powerful corporates, private capital, and of course states who most significantly wield this monopoly over coercive forces, through army, police, etc., armed forces, police, etc., through which they can enforce their will. So it's a very, very unequal, certainly a very unequal process of negotiation and engagement. Yet the story is really not one as simple as one of uh, marginalized communities resisting against projects, but has become something far more complex that comes out of the fact that there is this broader crisis of social reproduction within the neoliberal period. And related to that, of course, is that all of the sources that were these non-market sources, and I'm not talking about just labor in this context. Labor, I gave this one instant, but you also had forms of exchange of labor. Um, but all of these non-market sources, whether it was your fuel for for cooking, whether it's I remember in my field, I saw someone building a room, an extra room to their house because one of their sons was going to get married, so that would be his. um, and I saw how slowly where he got his resources from. He got the mud from somewhere. There's a little, what they call dongri. This was in Jharkhand, in East Singhbhum, a little hill, a rocky hill, um, where they said this was for the village. Everyone knows, there's an understanding that when anyone needs to build their house, they can go and take stones from that hill, right? But increasingly they said there are these two people now from the community who don't they have some land, but they're not interested in agriculture. Two young boys, they don't want to cultivate anymore, because now they have this great opportunity where they take the stones and break the stones and take them in these little tractor trucks and sell them, right, on a piece rate basis. But in piece rate basis, in that they have the resources, right? They're not doing it for a contractor, and that means that the amount of stones for now for the village to use is reducing. So you have all of these kinds of complex contexts within which all of the non-market sources for providing for so many of their needs are now eroding away. The need for going to the market to purchase everything increases, and therefore the need for money and cash increases, which leads to this complex place that we arrive at now. So I think I'll leave it at that, and sort of we'll go ahead for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasundhara. We have about 10 minutes for discussion and question answers. Some of you have shared your questions. I'll just read out. Avinash has asked this issue. He's talked about this issue of suicides. So Avinash has asked, how does the nature of suicides differ between the two countries? Because we have seen, particularly in India, more than 3 lakh, that is 300,000 farmers have committed suicide in a period of, say, early 90s to 2015-16, this period. So he has asked that whether Brazilian farmers also have issues related to crop failure and debt, and thereby leading to suicides. Is that the case in Brazil also? So yeah, Rafael, if you could throw some very briefly, if you could throw some light on this.
I thought you would go for all the questions then open to us, but okay. It's very first. Let me congratulate Vasundhara. It was actually very important to me because here I am discussing from the Brazilian perspective, but I'm here in India in my exchange PhD studying Indian agrarian question, and it was a true class for me that between uh, give me answers actually for some of my initial questions and give me some paths to go further and understand better exactly the complexity or and diversity of the backgrounds and regional questions and everything that are related to agrarian question in India. So about the suicide specifically, I got very happy with the specific question because it was part of my awakening for this relative with this study that I'm doing now. I came where I met Dr. Sakib. I came to a political economy school, regional school in Nepal in 2018, dedicated by the movement to accumulating political economy. And during the field times that we field visits that we had there, we heard direct from peasants, from farmers there in Nepal, and I was just surprised with the wow, it's just the same situation we are living. The thing about the poisoning, the doses of pesticides and everything, and when they realized they talked about the suicide, oh wow, we just did the same things in Brazil. I have to study this. So this specific question was part of my wow. I need to proceed in this study. Now I'm doing the PhD over all this first question. And yes, it is exactly the same. The situation for the suicide in specific, it is exactly the same. The entrance of the financial system and the governing part of the large part of the policies for agriculture and for small farmers and peasants in Brazil. The death by suicide has gone from 16.6 over 100,000 in 2007, so 16.6, to 18.6 in 2001, to 2011, and 20.5 in 2015. It's the increasing trajectory of suicides among peasants. It is mainly related to crop losses, to seasonal challenge they had, and they're like losing because what does the bank do when they have to execute the debt. They get the land and confiscate the land for that people. It is their life, so they prefer die. It is a true sensible question, and it got me interested to understand why I'm getting already the points of the advance of the capital movement in agriculture. It we have, of course, as Vasundhara market, many differences, but we have this similarity of the conditions of neoliberal era in agribusiness and big capital projects over the countryside and over the populations there.
Thank you, Rafael. Any other questions from people who have joined this session? You can also type your question in the chat box. In case there are no questions, I would like to invite Avinash to give the vote of thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Vasundhara and Rafael, for providing us an insightful understanding of India and Brazil agrarian overview, and also contributing to our RC15 Rural and Agrarian Studies of Indian Sociological Society. And we look forward for more such talks in the upcoming events. Thank you so much all for joining us, and thank you once again.